Shall we start? You want to say a quick prayer for us, Rod?
God our Father, fill our hearts and our minds with questions tonight. Because we're going to get some answers possibly, but I guess we'll probably leave this place with more questions still in our hearts. And we thank Alistair and Mike for presenting these things to us, and we just pray for them both, and we give thanks and just look forward to a lovely evening, Lord, because we know you are in the midst of us. So stay with us. Amen.
Amen. I always like to think we come away with better questions. But that's true, isn't it? They say, teachers say, "Oh, there's no silly questions." There are. There jolly well are. Anyway, right. So this is the topic we're going, and I'll jump right to what I'm getting at with that question. In fact, I think I mentioned it on Saturday. I think the problem with the church is that we focus on getting our doctrine right to the neglect of our lives. Because we live in a society that doesn't listen to us anymore. But I'll tell you what they do. They watch us. And they judge us. And Jesus actually was very clear that actually it's the way that we love will actually demonstrate who we truly are. And again, my principle here, we'll look at this today, and let's see where it goes. The discussion is better when we're exploring it. But I think that one of the things I've learned through this process, and having friends who have been scientists, is that actually the more I know about the world, it teaches me how to live in it, and above all, how to love in the world. So I have learned more about the ocean in the last 5 years than I have in the rest of my life put together. And it matters now what we throw in the sea. The damage at Polzeth can have impacts in Indonesia. I might be exaggerating a little bit. But if one of Mike's little plastic ducks can travel around the world, have you got it with you? I've got one in my house. You let me have one of his plastic ducks. We know from that extraordinary impromptu scientific experiment when these 20,000 plastic ducks crashed. Where did they crash?
Pacific, just off Japan, right in the middle of the Pacific.
And they were distributed right around the world because there's only one ocean. It's not 7, not 5, however you count it. There is one. So I think we need to make sure that as Christians we take the environment seriously, because when we don't, it's the poorest that always suffer. Always. Always. A lot of the climate change stuff is about the climate, but actually it's the poor that will get it in the neck, as they say. So, we don't need that. So, a quick look at last week. I just want to come back to one thing we said last week, last couple of weeks, because this has come up a couple of times since last week. We were focusing on creation, and a lot of the debates about creation, but the Christian faith, I argue, and science is all about evidence, so is what I hope I believe. You see, I'm always testing what I believe. Always. I'm always testing it. When I read the Bible, and funny enough, I don't know every word of it backwards. I don't. That might come as a surprise to you, but I've never really got my head around Habakkuk. But I'm always testing that what I think about God is consistent with Scripture. And so far, at the minute, what I believe is consistent with Scripture, but it's also, if you've been to any of my talks on same-sex marriage, it's consistent with Scripture, tradition, reason, and experience. But love is an experience, so I'll give you half points for that. That's exactly right. And that's, I hope, as Christians, that we are constantly testing what it is that we believe and just checking it out. Because here's the other thing. The world is changing, so what we believe about it needs to be at least nuanced, if not having a fundamental shift. Otherwise, if you stay the same, you're heading backwards as the world is moving. And again, the principle we see in that is that the universe is expanding. We are traveling at thousands of miles an hour. It doesn't feel like it. But we haven't got time to look at it, but I found a fantastic little YouTube clip that says we're actually moving in 8 different directions. But it's true, because we're spinning round. We're expanding out. We're zooming round the sun. We're wobbling on our axis. And I forget the rest. But they were very impressive. So how we're not just a complete giddy sense of nothing, a pile of goo, I do not know. yeah, that's right. Because I know what happened when I was on a roundabout and it went really fast, I ended up flying off into the swings. But of course, I think what I see in Scripture, and the more I read it, the more it's the recreation is the big story. We have 1 or 2 or 3 chapters on creation and 65 and a half books on recreation. So you've got to pay attention to that logic. What does the Bible actually talk about? People say to me, well, I can't be bothered with all the rules. I don't read many rules in the Bible, not really. A lot of stories. A lot of rules in Leviticus. 10 Commandments only occur twice. And Jesus doesn't preach really about rules. He preaches about a coming kingdom. About something that's arrived and it's really on its way. It's about recreation. And again, that singularity is Jesus. And I preached the other day, like a couple of Sundays ago, about that picture of the exploding shed. Remember that? It's a tremendous image. Go and have a look at the picture on the internet on it. It's tremendous. Single light bulb in the middle of the garbage. And then that moment, you get stillness and dynamism. And that's what, for me, is like following Christ. Be still to know that I am God, but I can move mountains. That's the kind of polarity, the dichotomy of following God. It costs us everything and costs us nothing. It costs us everything, it costs us nothing. You need to know the real thing to understand. Because frankly, words just don't cut it. We almost need a new language. So there we go. So let's have a quick look where we're going to go now. Now, I've been wanting to show you this clip for 3 weeks, so I'm going to jolly well get it up front. I like this one. And I think for me, this is a really good point to bring together a lot of what we've been saying over the 4 weeks. You'll see John Lennox, Irish, Oxford mathematician, famous apologist for the Christian faith. Let him speak for himself. Oh, sorry, yeah. Hang on. He's been asked, what is dark matter? Don't worry about that. But that's the question he's answering.
We are bamboozled into thinking that science explains. You see, somebody comes along, Isaac Newton, and he comes with the law of gravitation. There you are, that explains it. It doesn't. Newton knew that. The law of gravity describes what happens when massive bodies. Nobody knows, ladies and gentlemen, what gravity is. I wish they'd taught me that at school. Because what we've come to think of as scientific explanation is not explanation. It gives a partial description. And Wittgenstein, no less, said this, that the great deception of modernism is that the laws of nature are explanations when they're not. Now that limits the effect of science, but I find that many people do not realize it. Richard Feynman, one of the most distinguished physicists in North America, once said, don't let anybody fool you. Nobody knows what energy is. And that's very important. I was speaking to about 500 physicists in our atomic weapons research establishment, and a physicist came up to me and he said, Professor Lennox, that was very interesting, but you know, I detect you're a Christian. He was really sharp. And he said, but you see, you as a Christian, you're obliged to believe that Jesus was a man and God at the same time, isn't that right? I said, that's right. He said, can you explain that to me? Well, I said, can I ask you a question or two first before I try to? He said, sure. I said, tell me, what is energy? Actually, what I first said to him was more difficult. I said, what is consciousness? He said, I don't know. So I said, I'll do something easier. What is energy? He said, well, we can measure it, we can use it. I said, that wasn't the question. You know it wasn't. What is it? He said, I don't know. Oh, I said, that's very interesting. Do you believe in energy and consciousness? He said, yeah, I do. And you don't know what they are. Should I write you off as a physicist? He said, please don't. I said, you are prepared to write me off. Because the nature of God, The nature of God is infinitely more complex than the nature of energy that we don't know what it is. But I said there's something else. Why do you believe in consciousness and energy when you don't know what they are? And I had to help him a bit, but I'm very kind, you see. So I said, you believe in them because of their explanatory power conception. He said, that's right. And I said, that is exactly why I believe that Jesus is both God and human, because those are the only terms that make sense of the evidence as I see it. I tell you that story, ladies and gentlemen, because you never should be ashamed of saying, I don't know. There's so much we don't know. And dark energy helps me to indicate it. That's a very long-winded way of saying I don't know what it is either.
There's a lot in that, isn't there? I think that's wonderful. Science doesn't explain, but it describes beautifully. And the mistake is to think that just because it describes, it's all we need to know. Well, what do we know? The more we learn, the more we know there is to learn. And there's a biblical phrase for that. It's mystery. Mystery is not a puzzle to be solved. It's to live in a state where you realize that the more you learn, the more you realize there is to learn. That's how a good marriage should be. You find more to admire in the other party. Wish Susan could hear that. just kidding. Tell her I said that. Okay, I think that's an interesting one. I'm looking today to pull together this idea of faith and science and where they serve or work or fit together well. That image is a good one. Let me just show you another one. I am the gate, said Jesus. Whoever enters through me will be saved. Now, did Jesus mean that? You think you... What? But that's what he said. I had a very powerful sermon once. It's had a big impact on me. He said Jesus said what he meant and meant what he said. So forgive your enemies, you see. Does he mean that? Well, not literally. One of the enemies we like. He said that. Now the thing is, how do you know when to take Jesus literally or figuratively? How do you know? That's one of the great arguments. I have to tell you, I have parted company with people in churches over disagreements over whether Jesus meant things literally or figuratively. We've just been going through all sorts of ructions in the circuit in the Methodist Church about same-sex marriage. That's exactly one of those cases, and some have parted company with us. How do you know he's talking figuratively and not literally? I'll tell you why. How? Science. Because growing up, you tried doors and physicality and things like that. And by childhood science, which is the experience of growing your learning and testing it out, because that's what children are doing, that's why they fall down, that's why they drop things, that's why they make a mess, because that's how they learn about how the world works. That is science 101, as the Americans would say. And eventually you begin to learn that obviously that is figuratively. Why? Because of our knowledge and our experience, our scientific understanding, and the appliance of evidence. It's obviously true. That's why when he says, I am the true vine, we don't think he's a plant. And he does use these things. And therefore, throughout Scripture, science can help us to understand some of these things that are going on. And again, a good example of that is, for those that believe, I guess as I do, that the six-day creation is figurative. The evidence seems to say that. The context seems to say that. Other people look at that. And science, therefore, helps us. And when it comes to walking on water and rising from the dead, we come to a point where we say we may possibly have come to the limits of science's knowledge at the moment. But I'm okay with that. God doesn't fill the gaps. For me, God has more to say, more to teach. And the thing is, you see, It wasn't long ago where we had no concept of quantum physics at all. And yet now that is driving so much of it. It's like we've discovered a whole new branch of science in the last 100 years. 100 years. No concept. The study of biology, I'm going to show you a video in a minute, we had no concept of this. Not many years ago. But we haven't lost God. We learn more about him if we listen carefully. So I'm going to ask you now to listen carefully to Mike Kent, who's going to talk through our next video.
But before I do that, I'd just like to refer back to last week, because we sometimes do that. Alistair and I met on Wednesday to talk about the budget, and we talked about last week, a really interesting session. And I asked him, we said about the questions, we thought we got a lot of nice questions. And of course, being her husband, I referred to mirrors. And we thought it was very, very good, but at the moment we were so full of figures we couldn't remember it. But as I walked back home, I did remember what she said. We'd been talking about the importance of practice, and we were hammering it on. Alistair had been saying, I've been saying, yeah, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't say why the blah, blah, blah was, and what Alistair said was absolutely correct. You get a pigeon, you can train it to do almost anything. And it was Syed, I think that's how you pronounce it, the Times correspondent, who was a champion table tennis player. And he became a champion table tennis player by taking up this idea of practicing. And he was one of the people who coined the phrase, if you do 10,000 hours, which is what he could calculate that he did. Yeah, it's just a figure, really. You can become an expert, but you need to invest that sort of time. And it was the sort of thing that you can practice, become really, really good at. And so you think this practice is important. And then you think, well, what we should do is every day practice reading the Bible. Because the Bible is important. It's full of truth, and it's full of those sorts of things we should be doing. And as a child, you may be told to read the Bible. Okay? And I had some doubts about that. I don't know what, not about reading the Bible, it's being told to do it, but I had doubts about. And if we don't come to these things freely, and freedom is an essence of our journey of faith, I think. When I was invited to follow Christ, I was free to say yes or no. And several times in my life, I was indecisive, got splinters sitting on the fence. But you know, and you make your own decision to say yes or no. And coming back to the practice, as a sports science person, because I was involved in sports science and medicine, physiology and practice and sports psychology, absolutely right. Practice does make perfect, but only good practice makes perfect. Bad practice just makes you imperfect. You can be indoctrinated with bad things. We can see that. I was listening to something else last week. It showed Hitler catching the mood of the people. Charismatic, brilliantly charismatic, no one can deny that. He captured the moment and he worked off people and he got them into chanting. He was practicing everything, if you like, and those sorts of things. But for evil purposes. So you can misuse that ability of the brain to be used. But our faith, certainly my journey, has been one which has been free. And that's why I think that, just as Alistair said just now, I test it, and my testing has always been the same. I've been tested in a gentle way. My experience isn't the same as Tracy's, because I don't think I could cope with that experience. Seriously. And perhaps it wasn't for me. Doesn't mean it's any less or any more. It's just a different experience. And I can't experience that. So it's the fact that practice, good practice makes perfect. And good practice comes from someone voluntarily doing it and choosing to do it, then practicing to do it, to be creative. So that's that anyway. But I also wanted to mention there, because she isn't here to say anything. She'd be embarrassed if I said anything. I thought it was a very good point that she made, bringing it together. But what we're having a look at in a moment is a clip. It's about a minute and a half from Jordan Peterson. I smile because when I say Jordan Peterson, the room really usually splits into two. I've got a very good neo-Marxist feminist friend. She's absolutely brilliant, extremely brilliant. I cannot mention Jordan Peterson to her head widens and she goes up almost inflamed. That's absolutely brilliant. And he has been hijacked by people who want to defend patriarchy and other things. And he's taken out of context. But, perhaps. But I don't look at him like that. I see him a man on a journey. If you look at his history, he's on a journey just as we are. And see how his faith has changed. It really has. But I also recognise him as a man with a great deal of understanding and knowledge and expertise. He has done his 10,000 hours of practice as a clinical psychologist, dealing with extremely difficult people. I mean, insanely difficult people, really. And he's gathered experience from that, using his medical knowledge, because he would have had to cover medicine, and as a his neuroscience as well. So he's got a foot in the science camp. He isn't really a scientist. He isn't. He's an applied scientist. Doctors are not scientists, most of them. Most of them are applied scientists. That's fine. They've got to understand science. But he has an extremely good knowledge. And therefore, when I listen to him, I think, here's a man with a foot in neuroscience, with an ability to discuss philosophy, and he's worth listening to. He's also got a mind that's open. And I think that's an interesting thing. And he talks in this video, this clip, on truth. I think it fits in what we're doing tonight.
Nietzsche said that you could tell much about a man's character by how much truth he could tolerate, which is very interesting. You know, there's an idea in the great Western tradition that the truth is the way and the path of life, and that no one comes to the Father except through the truth. And I believe that to be the case, because I don't think that you can manifest who you are without the truth. And so I think it's literally and metaphorically true that the pathway to who you could be if you were completely who you were is through the truth. And so the truth does set you free, but the problem is that it destroys everything that isn't worthy in you as it sets you free, and that's a process of burning. And it's painful, because you cling to what you shouldn't be, partly out of pride and partly out of ignorance and partly out of laziness. And so then you encounter something true, and you all know this perfectly well, because when was the last time that you learned something important that wasn't a blow of some sort? You know, and it's often you look back at your life and you think, oh God, I really learned something there. I wouldn't want to do that again, but it really changed my life. I mean, sometimes it can really destroy you, you know, an encounter with the truth, and you never really recover. But now and then something comes along and straightens you out, and a lot of you has to go. A lot of you has to burn away.
It's very profound, that. Yeah. Do you recognise that as a truth, or is that an interesting thing? Most truth hurts. Yeah. Well, he makes a bold claim there, doesn't he?
He goes on. It goes on quite a long way. But he goes on to say that some experiences that he's had have been very painful, and he would not want to go through them again. But having gone through them, he's been enriched by that experience, and he wouldn't have not wanted to have done it. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I certainly can relate to that, and I know other people can. I mean, I was really, really fit at one time, really fit in my 30s and 40s. I'm running 100 miles a week cycling. Then I had pericarditis, and my heart rate went up to 200 per minute sitting up. I was in intensive care for a while. I got through it, it was fine. But I was incapacitated, I had post-viral syndrome. But what it did, I wouldn't have wanted it. Of course, I was looking forward to running. But it made me more empathetic. I could understand other people. And I would never have been able to understand that experience. And with members of the family as well, it's enabled me to be closer to them because of that empathy.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. It's not my wife. You'll see that why. Well, I just wondered, when I was at college training to be a minister, second time round, there was about 100 people in the room, about 80 Anglicans and about 20 Methodist, and Alan Bartlett, tremendous Anglo-Catholic priest and tutor, he said, right, I would like you to put up your hand if you can identify a point in your life where you had a very powerful encounter that affected your life. Now, you'd hope, wouldn't you, with 100 clergy, there'd be, quite a few of them. And I think there was something like 96 put their hands up. They'd all had a significant. And then he said, put your hand down if it was good and leave it up if it was a painful experience. And I don't remember anybody putting their hand down. That little bit of scientific research, isn't it? And including me. And that was fascinating. And all those people were there preparing for a lifetime of leading churches. So Peterson says that truth can be painful. It burns away stuff that's not worthy of it. That's quite something, isn't it? And there's a lot of material in that to think about. And that's the thing about Jordan Peterson. You've really got to think. But I just want to move us on a little bit from that, and we'll see how it all wraps up together. You'll see this is from Harvard, who put this little story together, and it moves from a story into how the brain works. So don't be surprised, and we're going to start talking about things that you may know a little bit about, endorphins and dopamine and stuff. 4 minutes and 18 seconds. We can manage that, I think.
This is Susan. Susan loves to bike. While out for a ride, she falls and breaks her arm. Special cells called neurons send a signal through the spinal cord to the brain, which interprets the signal as pain. Susan understands the pain means she needs to go to the hospital, and her body is equipped for survival, helping her not to panic so she can seek help. Many of her neurons are covered in proteins called opioid receptors. These receptors act like a brake to slow down the neuron's ability to send pain signals. When injured, her body releases natural painkillers called endorphins. Like a key in a lock, endorphins activate opioid receptors, slowing down the pain signal and preventing a panic. Susan gets treated for the broken bone, but 3 months later, her arm still hurts. And now that pain is making her feel depressed and anxious. So her doctor prescribes an opioid painkiller. There are many different opioids, but they all share a chemical similarity to our own endorphins. This allows them to bind to the same opioid receptors and stop pain signals. But that's not all they do. Deep inside Susan's brain is a region called the ventral tegmental area, or VTA for short. The VTA is full of neurons that produce a chemical called dopamine. When something good happens, dopamine is released, giving Susan a feeling of pleasure. This helps teach her brain to keep seeking out good things. To keep dopamine neurons in check, inhibitory neurons keep the brakes on until something good comes along. Just like the pain neuron, these neurons are covered in opioid receptors. When Susan takes the painkiller prescribed by her doctor, the opioid receptors turn off the inhibitory neurons and release the brake on the dopamine neurons. The rush of dopamine temporarily eliminates Susan's depression and anxiety, and she feels relief, calmness, and even euphoria. As Susan continues to take the painkillers, her brain responds by trying to regain its balance. Her inhibitory neurons work extra hard even when the opioid receptors are activated, and it becomes harder and harder for her dopamine neurons to release dopamine. Susan finds that she needs to increase her dose of painkillers in order to feel comfortable. This is called tolerance. Eventually, Susan's pills run out. Inhibitory neurons that had been working overtime are let loose, clamping down on those dopamine neurons and shutting them off almost completely. Now, not only is Susan in pain, but the depression and anxiety come back. On top of that, Susan feels ravaged by an inescapable physical sickness far worse than any flu. Susan's body is going through withdrawal. Most people who take opioids for a long time tend to experience some withdrawal, but they can still stop taking the pills and return to normal. But for people like Susan, It's not so easy. Her genetics and the environment she grew up in put her at a higher risk for addiction. Her withdrawal symptoms aren't just unpleasant, they're unbearable. Susan thinks the only way to feel normal is to find more opioids. And this is how the cycle of opioid addiction emerges, driven by a brain trying to regain its balance. But there is hope for Susan. Though the road to recovery can be challenging and there may be setbacks, treatment can retrain Susan's brain. With the help of medication and therapy, Susan finds pleasure in her life once again.
Now, I just thought as a little summary, it explains or gives us a little taste of how our brain works. It's a real picture. Of course, the name Susan means a lot to me. But it's the fact that we are extremely complex. And yet scientists are unpicking and understanding some incredible things. I wanted to show you some videos about synaptic transmissions and neurotransmitters, but even I can't take it all in just a few days. So what I am going to do is I'm going to focus on 5 neurotransmitters, because the thing is, we are actually, in some senses, a bunch of chemicals. We are. And to say that we're not just doesn't do justice to what is really going on in the astonishing creation that you are wrapped up in. It's quite extraordinary. And I just want to have a quick chat about some of these. And the question to keep asking, where do great decisions come from? The best decisions that you make. Where does the best of you come from? Those that would deny God say that it can come out of, well, evolution. And those of us that know something of God and had an experience, that moment we can't deny, we say, no, God somehow intervenes in our character. And the two seem to be at odds. Well, shall we have a look and see? Because it might not always be quite as much at odds as you might think. This is to help me, these notes, really. They're mainly there for my benefit, if I'm honest. But neuropsychology says it's chemicals that have evolved over millions of years, systems that guide us and push us forward, that actually allow human beings to operate differently to other animals. Because the thing is, they get us to work together emotionally, because we are not the biggest, or the strongest, or even in many contexts, the smartest creatures out there. We can do our own self-harm like no other animal. And we also make the mistake of actually butchering each other. Am I right in thinking there's only one other animal that goes to war? Is it the ant? The ants go to war. Chimpanzees go to war. If we're down to 2, I think the point's well made. But fair enough. And the argument I'm going to bring, because I've been persuaded by it, that each of these have a different role, and I just wondered, do you know what these do? Some people do seem to know a bit about these. Endorphins were mentioned. Do you know a bit, Fran? Do you know a bit about it? Well, come on then. Endorphin? No, I'm not. I'm just going to nod and look clever. Okay. So nobody want to have a go at this? I don't mind. Or just one of them. Among other things, yes, it does. It does, and you'll see why in a minute. Thank you for that. Yeah. Interesting. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know the answer to that, Rod, but you are right. It's genuinely part. If you remember that one, the opioids generate and produce dopamine, some of them. So we are trying to, with some of our psychological medication, we are trying to push different neurotransmitters, because what these are, they are signal systems that go through our body that affect how we feel. And one of the challenges I've always got is that I believe that most of us live most of our lives where we feel. How you feel is incredibly important to you. Incredibly. And you'll carry how you feel and not even share that with the people closest to you, sometimes for years. Our feelings really matter. And sometimes that comes about because of the outside environment. Sometimes it comes because of something going on inside of you. If I have a feeling and I don't like it, I sit and analyze it until I work it out, and it can take days. So we're going to just quickly look at these very quickly, and let's have a look how we go. Right. They're called the selfish ones, these two, because you don't need anybody else for them. Endorphins, they're basically painkillers generated by the body. And therefore, when you do lots of exercise, you do that. You get these endorphins and they allow you to carry on. So when you're doing 200 whatever, you must have had floods of endorphins. And here's the point though, you do all your exercise, you don't feel any pain. The following morning when you wake up, you can't move because all the pain killing's gone. And the point here is, oh hang on a minute, the point of that is, hang on a minute, let me just go back where we are. I'm going to go there. The reason is that we have, through evolution, the thing that we are very good at is that we are astonishingly good at endurance. Humans can walk and run for miles. Why? And biologists believe, I hesitate to be careful with the biologists in the room, but because what we would do is we weren't always great at killing animals, but we could wound them. So you'd follow them and track them. And you needed to do that for a day to then return with the food to the camp, to the family, to others that you were with. And that sort of follows the pattern of how endorphins work. In modern living, of course, we get a high for physical exercise. I mean, it's quite trendy now to get very fit, but sport has been part of our life. Organised sport had a massive impact on society from the 1880s onwards, right across the Western world and now around the world. The biggest events there are now are sporting events, and that's driven by the high and the pleasure that comes from having pain killing and that sense of that rush of taking part in physical exercise. Sport gives us that, and so does laughter. Because lots of laughter, what do you say if you laugh too much? Stop it, it's starting to hurt. And endorphins are given by that. It's a pleasure thing, but it's really about pain killing. That's really what it does. Now, dopamine, I discovered this not long ago, and it's really interesting. Dopamine actually is the buzz you get as a reward. When you do something, when you make a step along a project, when you see something that you like, when you get a sense that you can achieve something or you've done it, it's a stimulation that sends a sense around you and a real, what I like to call it, a sense of achievement. And that comes, this is really interesting, from the need to prepare to get food over the medium and long term. You see, humans, if you woke up every morning and only got food that day, most of them would die because you won't always have food available. Crops take a long time. You've got to plan farming. If you're going out hunting, you might not pass something. Something that you want to eat might not pass by. So you would plan, and over the years, the millions of years, we have evolved a system that gives us a buzz and a pleasure in small tasks rather than the big one. And we can get that sense of buzz. So an example I was given is you walk along and you like apples and you see an apple tree, little buzz of dopamine. You get close to the apple tree and you get a sense of anticipation. You might, another buzz of dopamine, you might start to salivate. There's a road in Leeds, when I drive up it, I salivate. Because, you see, I used to, every time I used to go back and drop the kids off at school and drive back home, I used to pop into a curry house and have a fantastic curry. And it was the best curry I'd ever had. And literally, when I drive up that road, even now, I salivate as I walk up that road. And that is a little burst of dopamine giving me a sense I'm in the right place, this might happen, and it builds up. If you like a project, You will enjoy all the steps of the project. Some of you might like more, but it's not just the final project you enjoy, it's the building up. And it's dopamine that motivates you, pushes you. It gives you a reward and a response to these things that are happening. Links to food, small shonts linked to acquiring food. And it's triggered apparently predominantly by vision. It's your eyes when you see it. One of the things I strangely enjoy, I mean, it is a bit strange, that when I've been on the board of a company, I've been on a few companies, I couldn't wait for the finance reports. Because actually, when I look at that, I know where we are. I know what needs to be done. I can read that. Do that, do that, and do that, and we can fix this. And I get a big dopamine hit. There's that lovely phrase, isn't there, in Chariots of Fire. Have you seen that? You must have seen Chariots of Fire, I guess, that film. And Eric Liddell, he's talking about how he can be running for Christ. And he says, when I run, do you know the line? I feel his pleasure. That's a beautiful line. Where do you feel God's pleasure? What is it you are doing when you just think, that was just so satisfying? Well, let me tell you, the way that God is speaking to you that way, it may well be by giving you a dopamine rush. I see no conflict. No conflict in the two. What I do is I just may understand a little bit more about what's going inside my brain and down my neuron and my neurotransmitters. I'm okay with that. Because also, so abstract goals. It's about achieving, but here's the problem. It's highly addictive. We love it. These little hits. We chase them all the time. And we can get dopamine hits by enjoying alcohol, nicotine, gambling, gaming. Gaming. You see, if any of us play games on our phones, I play games on my phone. Sometimes to stop me worrying. It's a distraction for me. But I've learned that if I don't win now and again, I get thrown away. They are designed to keep you in. They let you win just enough. The entire gaming industry is designed not to stop you winning. They want you to win. You go to Las Vegas, they want you to win. Because long term, you lose. But we go and they get addicted. We get addicted because we get these dopamine rushes. And again, when you talk to anybody that's addicted to gambling, say, they love the sound of the coins dropping on the slots. That's the most addictive thing there is in Las Vegas, if you've watched any work on that. All these things, these little buzzes, and some of them are very strange. Success. I have to tell you, I genuinely have worried over in my life that I am addicted to success. And I'll tell you how I know I'm addicted to success, because I put my family at risk in order to get some. Just like the addicts do to get some more drugs. Just like an alcoholic does. When they put the most precious things at risk to feed the addict, that's when you're addicted. And shopping. I mean, shopping is just the modern version of going out hunting and acquiring the stuff and the food that we need. And the thing is, debt is one of the real hidden, not discussed issues in our society, and people put at risk their future to buy stuff they don't need. It's very, very sad. They'll satisfy anything and anyone to get their next hit, looking for another hit. And the thing is, dopamine is triggered by all this stuff. It's very sad. Yes, Norm.
It's the supermarkets that play at that, isn't it? They put things at eye level, just at the till, so you can grab them, and they play on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they make you free offers. Yeah. It's not just a good idea, it's how our brain works. And it has an impact.
I had a friend who was a rep for Cadbury's, and at that particular time, some time ago, you could buy a pack of two of these biscuit bars, but he said if you go to the shelf, you could buy two singles cheaper than the bargain
Is that right?
tin in the basket.
Yeah.
But because it was a bargain, people bought the two more expensive than two singles.
Very, very, very good. Now that's really interesting, isn't it? When we start to understand that, it also makes us worry or think carefully about other things that we're doing. I quite like talking in public. I don't know if you've noticed that. But I can sit and tell myself I'm doing the work of God and you lucky people to have me because God sent me. I also have to tell you on occasions, I might just have to admit that it's not a good idea to keep on doing this all the time at the risk of my family because actually I'm getting a bit of a buzz from it, if I'm honest. And all of a sudden science is helping me to be a Christian. Because I tell you, how many times have you and I heard about Christian leaders crumbling and collapsing, not just with health, but with moral failure and disasters in their lives? Of the 5 ministers who had a big impact on my life, 4 of their marriages collapsed. And it might just be that instead of listening to some of the rhetoric in church, I might be a better Christian if I realize what I'm addicted to. It might be true of you. That we could learn something here. That I'm obsessed with this. And there'll be things maybe in your private life you're just thinking, I'm spending a bit too much time on that, or a bit too much money at that. Anyway, just a thought of how science and faith actually can help us. Endorphins and dopamine. Now there are 2 others. Serotonin, sleep you said, nice one. We call these management chemicals. These are designed to keep you and those around you safe. They give us some lovely warm feelings. We'll come on to oxytocin in a minute, which is sometimes called the love chemical. I promise to be tasteful. And serotonin is remarkable. These evolved as part of a response to danger, scarcity, predators, warfare, weather, outside. You see, here's the thing. Through history, out there has been really dangerous. It's only really recently that we feel really safe. Which is why we all can't believe what's happening in Ukraine. Because I thought we'd grown out of that kind of thing. And now we just look like we did back in the Second World War. Shocking. Frightening. We're starting to plan troops out in Eastern Europe again as part of NATO. Out there has always been life-threatening. And in modern living, we now don't think that at all. Now we think everything is ours by right. But I have to whisper, I'm not sure that's true. I just don't think that's true. The huge advances in health has given us an expectation of much longer lifestyle, and more than that, a better quality of life. I was talking to someone yesterday, talking about someone who died. How old? 76. Oh, that's no age. When I was a kid, that was 3 years older than the average age of a man. We have radically changed what we think, because actually we no longer believe out there is dangerous. We have evolved to create a number of this chemical message that says when we're safe, when we're gathering people in, when we are balancing and controlling things, we get a buzz, that lovely feeling when things are the way they should be. It's right. That's very different from dopamine hits. Not the same thing. But you get it, and I bet there are things. You just think, that was lovely, that. Just the way it should be. When my mother, it's when all the family are together and not arguing. But you'll have them in your own, when your world is in order. For me, it's when I'm painting something in our house, the fire's on, Susan's knitting, and England are beating Scotland in the rugby. Then I know anything else doesn't really matter. But let's look a bit more at serotonin. You see, by those surges, those senses, we decide who and what to allow in to our safe space. You have some friends you allow into places that you won't allow into anywhere else in your life. And I don't just mean physically, I mean you wouldn't tell some people something, would you? And some people, you tell them everything. You let them in, they're safe. Serotonin gives you a sense, a buzz, when you feel safe. And the lack of that, when you feel under threat, scares the life out of you. That sense of emptiness. You must have felt it. Fear comes from that. And it's who we allow into our home, our community, our friendship, society, company, church, our heart. And it's the key one that gives a sense of leadership. Different styles of leadership. The leaders that draw people in. The leaders that are interested in other people. Not the leadership that dominates, but the leadership that nurtures. That's what serotonin inspires. It causes us to take on responsibility. Because we have evolved that some people say, I'll do that. I'll make sure that's done. And there's something in it. And again, some of you are highly developed in this. I sometimes, at the tube station, for example, which is a complicated little operation, what they need above everything else is a grown-up who'll do the jobs that nobody else wants to do. So that's what I've been doing for 5 years. And in fact, I was at a meeting one time and one of them said, "Oh, thanks for doing that, Dad." And that's right. And you know what? Although I didn't like doing most of them, I loved doing it. Do you know what I mean? You do things that just need to be done. And you don't like doing them. It's serotonin that makes you do that. That's what the neurotransmitting evidence seems to say. That's what shapes us in it. Leadership, responsibility, control. Not the kind of, you do what I want. It's just making sure everything's all right and everyone fits in. Safety. It also gives us, therefore, a sense of pride and status. Because actually, you have a certain role. It's what you do with it. Do you use your power for good or for selfish reasons? And because of this, it's the ones whose moods are stable. That's why it helps you sleep. Because you don't want volatile people in charge, because you don't know where you're going from one minute to the next. Serotonin calms people down. It gives them, and comes from at the same time, and feeds off a sense of self-confidence. Common goals and experiences also incredibly give shared hits of serotonin amongst people in the same group. When people get on the same thing, when we all catch the vision, when we all share the same team. You see, why do you think football supporting and rugby league crowds sit in different parts? Because the hit is bigger when you're not mixed up, except at Wakefield Trinity. If you go to Bellevue, which is an absolute dump, I can say that, because it's not a nice ground. And I got there late. I was a Leeds Rhinos fan, of course. I went there by myself, and I thought, right, I went with Joshua, and I said, come on, we're going to be late. And I looked at, there was a big stand at one end. It's a terrible crowd, really. And we went up, and we ran up there, and we got in, and out came Leeds Rhinos first. They trotted out on the end going, here come Leeds Rhinos, and all our guys in the blue and yellow, and all the chants and the songs we sing. I won't sing them with you. The thing is, Wakefield are blue. Look, we're blue and yellow. Wakefield are blue. And then he said, and now the home team, your stars, Wakefield Trinity Wildcats. And the whole stadium where I was erupted again. Because would you believe, there's only one stand, so all the people are in the same place. And they have the same colours on as us. And you know what? It rattled me. I thought, now, there's never any violence at rugby league. And you know, every time the other team cheered, every time the other team scored, people round us cheered. I thought, I don't like this. I'm in the wrong place. I didn't get my serotonin fix. Now, I slightly exaggerate that story, but you get the point. You see, this reinforces relationships and builds communities. You need a leader who gets this and behaves like that because they have appropriate levels of serotonin, and they will inspire that in yourselves. Leaders need followers who want to be part of a community, a team that can work together, because only groups of people that work together could feed each other and protect each other. Mike took me out on a walk. He took me out to the rumps. Do you remember that? And he pointed out that fence that used to be there that goes over the rumps, that defensive battery, because people would stay behind that to look after each other. You and I know well, if they start butchering each other in there, that wall is useless. That's what serotonin is. It's a binding agent that binds people around a common goal, and it's powerful. and essential. Winning for a purpose is how teams win. Win for the coach. It's amazing. If you listen to the teams that we need to hear the interviews, they're passionate about the team. They're not passionate about the cup. They're more excited about the team than they are about the cup. Everybody wants to win the trophy, but winning it for something is better. But here's the problem with serotonin. You can fool it. And we live in a society that does, and is often around status. And again, just as the supermarkets play it, so do the marketing people who build up and put values on brands that associate status with brands. Very effective. Highly effective. And we identify ourselves with brands, and if you think you don't, you're wrong. You do. I only drink Guinness because it's good for me. That's the only reason I drink Guinness. And I only drink Carlsberg because it's the best beer in the world, probably. That's it. But you know, we are tricked by this. And we sit and have such powerful visual symbols. Some of the most intelligent and best paid people in the world know how to tickle our serotonin bits. And it gives us a false sense of this. It is trickable. And that's why, you see, in our modern society, where we have an unprecedented number of inputs, because we know how these things work now, you and I are in danger of actually finding the science doesn't help us. And it actually sells us, instead of a common identity, it actually divides society and people when we overplay status and use what we own to look down on other people. That's science. Not just morality, it's science. Or science contributes to our understanding of that. You got that? We have serotonin because it's designed to solve a problem. Leaders protect the group to ensure that the weaker, necessary members can still eat. That's where it came from. You see, society's small groups, if only the healthy and the strongest survive, they will miss certain skills. So the leaders would look after. And here's the way it's been put across to me. In good leadership, when serotonin is the key binding agent that's driving people, the good leaders eat last, not first. And in much of the animal kingdom, but not all of it, it's the powerful that eat first, but not always. You're watching, is Mike going?
Well, I'm waiting. I'll wait until you finish that digging up pit, and I'll No, it's very...
I quite fancy hearing it now, actually, Mike. Before we come on the oxytocin love chemical. No, come on.
Right. It's very interesting because Alistair is trying to talk about something which is very complicated. And what he said, nothing wrong with what he said. What he's left out is very important. When scientists do these things on serotonin, on endorphins, they're doing things in the Western methodology, not recently because it's all changed. All the methodology and physiology has changed. We're not looking at serotonin, we're not looking at dopamine. We do those experiments with isolated nerves and with individuals, and you control situations. It's the only way you can really analyse it. So I take you, with your permission, and I pump you up to serotonin and see what happens to you, okay? And what Alistair said is correct. But we're not organisms which are solely influenced by any one of these things that any one of our moods. They are influential. We're actually, a good way of describing it is that we have this cocktail of chemicals which are a mixture of things which are played out and organised like an orchestra. So you'll get dopamine as one instrument, you'll get endorphin as another instrument, and so on. And you'll get thyroxine. And there is a control centre. The pituitary gland acts as the conductor of the orchestra, trying to keep everything in balance. And your balance will be different to my balance because there'll be slight differences. And therefore, I'll be a very agreeable person, will be very disagreeable, or the other way around. So it's, and we're not we're not slaves to these chemicals at all. We really are not. We can be, but we're not. Because one thing, what scientists in the West are realizing, and physiologists are realizing, is you cannot look at things in isolation. So you can't look at the nervous system in isolation to the endocrine system, which it once was. They are interacting together. They're interrelated. So mind, body, and I would say soul work as a unit. And one of the things which we've not explained here is, Alice is absolutely correct.
Not explained yet, Mike. Yeah, you're quite right.
Right. So I'll let Alistair say the bit that's missing.
No, I want to hear you.
The bit that's missing is the bit that we're all aware of, which John Lennox referred to, which is something that no one can explain yet, even though they try to, and that's consciousness. Our consciousness. So I may be predisposed because I've been angry, I may be predisposed to hit someone. Something stops me from doing it. So I might have enough testosterone, someone might have annoyed me, I may be angry, all those things, but I may be able to stop myself from doing it. Something stops me. Or something helps me do something positive. Serotonin may be there for leaders, but how you use that serotonin depends on perception, consciousness. And consciousness no one has been able to explain it, a bit like energy, even matter, but consciousness is the big one. You can try to explain it by saying that it is a product of the brain. That's the bottom to top up. Those of us who are aware of consciousness think that's inadequate. Where does our creativity come from? Where do our values come from? Where do our ideas come from? I can say how I react to someone who's coming to me and about to hit me. That's a nervous reaction with hormones. It's automatic. But what about those things which I've got time to consider, that I've reflect on and changed my mind on? Alistair's aware that's happened a lot of times. I've agreed on something, at the moment, and then reflected on it and said, well, actually, I don't think that's quite right. Something is there. And I think that is consciousness. And God is not consciousness. God, we've tried limiting God, but certainly a better model of God than just man is consciousness, or energy, or whatever. But if we've got consciousness and we've got access to a supreme consciousness, our inspiration may come from, that's just a way of looking at it. So consciousness is actually something that human beings have, because we are made in the image of God.
I'm supposed to be the preacher, not you.
Yeah, well, this is brilliant, because he's done the science bit and I'm doing the preaching. Well done.
There's a line in that Susan's brain thing. There's an interesting line, because I've watched it a few times, obviously, to check where it works. It mentioned the endorphins and the dopamine, and it did focus on those. But it said that she had a predisposition through her genes and her upbringing. I thought that's fast. And it just zoomed past that. But I think that's the key thing. And I agree with Mike. But even then, we've got to work out, are you a product of your upbringing, your environment, or what? And I think it's complicated. Very, very complicated. Okay. Oxytocin. This is the pleasure that we get from intimacy, affection, a sense of belonging, a sense of safety. Comes from physical contact and acts of genuine generosity. However, let's be clear, not all physical acts. Depends who does it. And in fact, even with people you know and love, it depends when you do it. Very important.
Is oxytocin the one that they give to induce pregnancy?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Isn't it, David? It is. Don't drag me down that rabbit hole. I don't know anything about that. You see, I said, do you know anything about that? No, you tell us, and then we'll drop you right in it. I'm one lecture ahead of you, Fran. That's all. That's all I am. But it is interesting. Oxytocin comes when people apparently some research done that says money does never generate that. Money gifts don't give it. But time and creative energy does. Fascinating that, isn't it? I was taught, you want to show you love somebody? Don't just give them something of you. That's why there's something very special about handmade cards from Max's wife. There's something wonderful about that. Mind you, I've enjoyed all the cards I've had, especially yours, Liz. What's also interesting is that apparently if you see acts of generosity, that generates oxytocin in small amounts for those that see it. Which is why people sit and watch Band-Aid and Red Nose Day. Huge. And there's a whole sense of oxytocin that drives that, and a sense of affection and love. But again, sometimes it can be a bit self-serving. We can trick it. But the thing about oxytocin, it inhibits the addictive effects of dopamine. And of course, when you become addicted to things, it's your relationships that go downhill very, very quickly. And therefore you lose oxytocin, and the addiction takes over more. And you're exactly right, Fran. You're caught up in an awful thing. Those living in with a strong oxytocin levels boosts your immune system, improves problem solving. And Mike said, where does our creativity come from? I don't know the answer to that. Well, I do personally have a belief about that. It's called God. But it improves creativity. Now, having said all that, many of the artists that I've studied were deeply troubled souls, you know. They're not models of good behavior. But actually, I think in day-to-day lives of creativity, let's do that. Let's try that. How do you fancy doing that? That comes from being in a safe environment. And again, we explain this by this neurotransmitter system, that these are the 4 key chemicals, I think, that seem to give us a sense of safety and develop us as people. Okay? But I want to talk very quickly about a 5th one. Cortisol. Now, I'll tell you where this comes from. I've done you once or twice a Bible. This is my Bible. I've done this. This is my Bible. And it is my Bible. Some of the pages in it are very dirty because they've been touched many times. And I would say this at the beginning of every assembly. I used to do 10 assemblies every half term in 10 schools. And I said, and the reason the pages are dirty is I keep looking for the treasure that's in it. And every time I look, and then I would always go, oh! And let me tell you, every little eye would be turned on me when I went, oh! You want to get kids' attention? Don't shout at them. Just gasp. And that's a shot of cortisol going right through them. I was explaining to it, it's the meerkats that jump up and they're watching. And it's amazing, you see, one little signal, and the whole herd darts. And they all get this shot of cortisol. It is a stress and anxiety hormone that, bang, gets a quick reaction. It'll be linked to adrenaline, I'm sure. But it's really about this. It comes from a rustle in the grass, first stage of the fight or flight. And what it does is it shuts off your growth and your immune systems because you don't need them for a few seconds to get going. You want everything in getting out of the field and away from that lion, getting away from that woolly mammoth. And it also happens when you're trying to get away from a bully of a boss or a co-worker that undermines you. And what happens then, very quickly, is that actually it inhibits oxytocin, and we know that stressful environments stimulate long-term low levels of cortisol, spelled wrong, sorry. And what happens then? It causes illness and early death. You know when you have stress and people faint or die or ill? One of the roles of that is because of this. It's one of the reasons. And again, this is the very first thing we can learn about such. There's more to it. Of course there is. But there's enough here to hear, one, science and faith and love. I don't see any conflict here at all. I need to learn. You see, if I'm going to be a boss, if I'm going to be a minister, if I'm going to be a good friend, if I'm going to be a neighbour, I need to realise that the impact that our behaviour has in small levels makes a big deal. What did Jesus say? In the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our sins. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. Grudges against neighbours, grudges against families, grudges within workplaces cause a long-term low level of stress. They do, says the science. And Jesus says, forgiveness. Forgiveness. Not letting people off, that's not the same. We'll have another lesson about forgiveness another day. But forgiveness is the way actually for everyone to win here. And there's more to be said on that, isn't there? Forgiveness is complex. But I'm just showing what the science says. Okay? That's the end of the five neurotransmitters. There are plenty of others. Mike managed to get 3 or 4 into full marks. I hear the 34,000 of them is what I heard. But we're not doing that many. But there we go. So I'm going to fly very quickly through this. Alcoholics Anonymous. Book written in 1939. The story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. Okay? We're not going to go through the 12 steps, but I do have them all here. By the way, there is a whole library of books which prove that the science says how the 12 steps work. The 12 steps was developed by Christians. It's not Christian because it doesn't really talk about Jesus, but it does talk about a higher power. It does talk about God. Anybody been through a 12? You probably wouldn't have it. You'd be anonymous, wouldn't you? You'd have been through one, wouldn't you? You see, there you go. But I've been on several of these sessions. I have to say, as an observer, I actually led one once. Just headlines. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol. That's what we did to get off our alcoholism in 1939. That our lives had become unmanageable. Firstly, you've got to admit it. We're going to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. You have to believe that something can be done. And now we're not just talking about science here. We're talking about the response of our consciousness. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of a God, and this is where some Christians go a bit funny, as we understand him. Some of my, what should we call them, more conservative friends, refuse to have anything to do with the 12-step program because of that line. Whereas I have to tell you, I don't really have a problem with that. I'm crystal clear about Jesus Christ as my Lord and Saviour. Let me tell you, I'm crystal clear on that. But even the disciples didn't agree on what he was like and who he was. Even the 12. So I figure, I don't mind someone who's got no church background working it out and bumbling along as they go along, just like I do. Anyway, sorry, I get a bit passionate about that because they really annoy me. Okay, we make a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Which do you think of those things that are going around your head? Which one's dopamine, endorphin? You need some endorphin, you need some painkillers if you're going to do that. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. By the way, not everybody. One other human being will do in the 12-step program. That's why you keep it anonymous and close. And we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of our character. Good heavens above. Have you seen this before? It's astonishing. There's only one other thing I know similar to this. And do you know what it is? It's John Wesley's rules for being in a Methodist class. In fact, that was one of the inspirations for the 12 Steps program. I am willing and able to admit all my wrongs to the cell. Makes our house groups look a bit wet, doesn't it, to be honest? And I have to tell you, I don't have the courage to do that with you. Not for my life. I'll listen to your sins, but you're not hearing mine. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings, made a list of all persons we had harmed, and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. I'm going to put right all the wrongs I've done. They've got a lot of work to do, some of the lads I know. Continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, we admitted it. My word. I think that would change our churches if we did that. And we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. And I'm leaving it up to the 12th one. They say if you don't do the 12th, you'll relapse. Do you know what the 12th one is? Do you know what the 12th one is? Go on, have a go, Alison. That's a really good, wrong, but really good. Really good. In fact, you're sort of right, actually. No, praise be all the way through it, actually. Nice try. No, if you don't do this, you will relapse. You help another alcoholic to learn what you've learned. If you don't do that. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Now, all those things that you've seen there, they're driven not by chemicals. They're driven by consciousness, which we still don't understand. But at some point, you can make a choice. You see, one of the things I love about following Jesus Christ is when I read it, lots of different people came to him. Different social, different attitudes, different problems, different issues. And Jesus responded, and it only took one thing. They had to ask him. That was it. Money was never an issue. Status was never an issue. It was the request. They asked him. And that's it. And it's incredible the things he offered. And in some ways, he offered some of the best things to the people who had least to offer him. You see, the best offer in the whole of Scripture is done to a thief dying on a cross next to him. A man self-admitted guilty, busted, done, nothing, and didn't even ask the right question. Will you remember me when you come into your kingdom? Didn't ask for salvation, just said, don't forget me, mate. You see, he just prayed to the God as he knew him, as he understood it. And what did Jesus say? Today you'll be with me in paradise. Moves me, even now I can have a little dopamine hit when I hear that. Oh, serotonin probably. Right? You run your life on your feelings. And let me tell you, your feelings matter. And I hope you're with someone who thinks your feelings matter. But they're just feelings. And if you go around to any rehab in the country, they say that to each other. They say to you, how are you getting on today? Oh man, I'm just feelings. There's something bigger. Something better. The science can describe what's happening, but they can't explain yet why some will make the change and others don't. That 12th step's so important. Do you understand what I have done for you? Jesus asked them after he had washed their feet. You call me teacher, status. Lord, status. And rightly so, because that's what I am. But now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. For you see, I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. We'll go back making the same mistakes. If we come off and we have withdrawal symptoms of these, if the science just carries on, if that's all it is, we will relapse. But if we consciously and intentionally make a decision to serve, you will become a believable church. Not just a believing one. You see, the world doesn't listen to us, but it does watch us. 2 minutes early. Shall we finish there?
Just saying to share with the group. He won't mind me saying this.
Is it about me?
It's about Matthew, my wonderful nephew, who's 33 years old, and he's soon to be 5 years this September, completely clean of cocaine lives on a 12-step program, and we're very proud of him, aren't we? It's astonishing. He was so addicted. He actually ended up trying to take his own life, and he was 20 minutes really from death. And he was still back at work a month after that, because his mother, my twin sister, went up there, and boy, she sorted him out. But he joined Cocaine Anonymous, and he still lives by the 12-step program every day. And it is astonishing what that, and just reading that last verse of John, it was incredible. And how some Christians can get upset about that, I don't know, because it saved Matthew's life.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, I think I was talking about this at Padstow. I learned very early on in this line of work. You see, people say, oh, that's a great work you're going to do. Let me just tell you, it's no different from working with you lot. No, I mean it. Because we're all addicts. I'm a bit fortunate. I think I've worked out my addiction is dopamine and a little bit of success. We're all addicts. All of you. And the thing is, they will all take your life and your relationships. You see, actually, we need to be focused on the one thing that will give life. These addictions will rob us and are robbing us right now. The only difference between the people at the lighthouse and the middle class is that their addictions are illegal. The middle classes, our addictions are encouraged. You get rewarded for them. That's quite something, isn't it? We live in a society that actually secretly likes workaholics. And in fact, in some places, businesses depend on them. The church does at the minute, if I'm absolutely honest. We'd be going down much quicker if certain people weren't absolutely slogging their guts out all the time. There's a story to come on that. Do you see the difference? It's not that different. We're all addicts. In reality, I think that's... I don't use the word sin a lot. Not because I don't believe in it. I think it's a word that falls on deaf ears. But we're addicted to the wrong stuff. We're addicted to stuff, to attitudes, to values, to self-obsession, which is killing us, our relationships, and those around us. And you and those around you need to be rescued from that. And the first thing we do is admit it and say, I need help. Because you do need help. I'm not condemning anybody. I'm in the same mess as you are. Anyway, I'm going to start another sermon. I think we'll stop there, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks to Mike for his wonderful contribution. I like being quiet, actually, when I listen to Mike. I think it's great. Thank you for those that have done the coffee. Particularly thank you for the wagon wheels, though I haven't seen them for 3 weeks because David's eaten all. But there we are. And thank you for Max for all the work he's been doing. We will put this one up in 3 days on the website, so if anyone wants to go back and revise it, you're welcome to do that. And looks like Mike wants to wrap up.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Alistair, because he's joined me, it was just over a year ago. Alistair thought he was on his sabbatical, and we had this invitation to actually join in, at least to apply for the grant for the E-Class and improving church leadership in the age of science. And Alistair, even in that period, willingly devoted his name to it, signed his name on it, and supported it, and it's been great. It's been a good experience for me, because it isn't just about the church leader, of course, it's about the scientists in congregations learning from the people around them as well, because it allows you to understand the church, whereas the church leader understands science. And it wouldn't work at all if it was just a conversation between us. And we talked about this earlier, it's like sharing the sunset. It's much better when you're sharing it with others. And we talked also on Sunday about the importance of church and coming to church. It isn't just about the sermons and worship, it's about being together, being able to, what do they say, knock the sharp edges off each other to learn from each other, so that we can live together and we're beings under God. So thank you, Alistair, for what you've done. It's